The transport ship Meridian's Edge shuddered as another plasma bolt struck its hull. Sergeant Marcus Chen pressed himself against the bulkhead, his rifle ready, sweat beading on his forehead despite the ship's failing life support. The emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow, and the constant blaring of alarms made it hard to think clearly. 3 days ago, Marcus had been enjoying shore leave on Kepler Station. Now he found himself aboard a civilian transport that had been converted into a refugee vessel, fleeing from the Zephyrian invasion fleet that had swept through the outer colonies like a plague of locusts. The ship lurched violently to starboard, throwing Marcus against the opposite wall. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the vessel as automatic systems tried to contain hull breaches. Through the chaos, he heard Captain Reeves' voice crackling over the intercom. All military personnel to emergency stations. We've lost main engines, and life support is failing. Prepare for emergency landing procedures. Marcus made his way through the crowded corridors, past families huddled together in fear. Humans, Altarians, even a few Centauri merchants who had been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But it was the group near the rear cargo hold that made him pause. 7 alien women sat in perfect silence, their pale blue skin almost luminescent in the emergency lighting. Their large, dark eyes tracked his movement, but they made no sound, not even when a child nearby was crying, or when the ship shook from another impact. Their silence was absolute, and somehow more unsettling than all the chaos around them. Marcus had never seen their species before. They were humanoid but distinctly alien, with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to hold an ancient sadness. Their clothing was simple, almost prison-like in its uniformity. What struck him most was how they seemed to move in perfect synchronization, as if connected by some invisible thread. Sergeant Chen. Lieutenant Hayes appeared at his shoulder, breathing hard. We need you in the forward section. The Zephyrians are trying to board us. Marcus nodded, but found himself looking back at the silent women one more time. There was something about them that nagged at his mind. Something that didn't fit with the rest of the refugees. The battle for the ship was brief but intense. The Zephyrian boarding party consisted of 6 heavily armed soldiers in powered armor, their insectoid faces hidden behind tactical visors. They moved with military precision, cutting through the ship's minimal defenses like a hot knife through butter. Marcus and the other military personnel aboard, just 4 soldiers total, fought desperately to protect the civilians. They managed to eliminate 3 of the boarders before being overwhelmed. Lieutenant Hayes fell first, a plasma bolt burning through his chest armor. Private Rodriguez was next, caught in a crossfire while trying to protect a family of Altiran refugees. By the time the smoke cleared, Marcus was the only soldier left standing. His left arm hung useless at his side, burned by a glancing plasma shot, and his rifle was nearly depleted. The surviving Zephyrians advanced methodically through the ship, herding the civilians toward the main cargo hold. That's when Marcus understood what was really happening. This wasn't a random attack on a refugee ship. The Zephyrians were conducting a slave raid, and they had been specifically hunting these 7 alien women. As he watched from his hiding place behind an overturned cargo container, he saw the lead Zephyrian approach the silent group with what could only be described as satisfaction. The alien women didn't resist. They didn't even seem afraid. They simply stood and allowed themselves to be shackled with what appeared to be some kind of neural control devices. The moment the devices activated, their large eyes went completely blank, becoming empty and lifeless. Marcus felt his blood run cold. He had heard whispers about the Zephyrian slave trade, particularly their interest in species with psychic abilities. These women weren't just prisoners, they were being turned into living tools, their minds suppressed so completely that they became nothing more than biological machines. One of the Zephyrians began scanning the cargo hold with a portable sensor, looking for any remaining threats. Marcus knew he had perhaps 30 seconds before he was discovered. He could try to fight, but with only half a magazine left and a wounded arm, he wouldn't last long against 3 armored soldiers. But as he crouched there, watching those 7 women standing in their mechanical silence, something inside him rebelled against the idea of just giving up. Maybe it was his training. Or maybe it was something deeper. The human instinct to fight against injustice even when the odds were impossible. The scanner was getting closer. Marcus made his decision. He stepped out from behind the cargo container, his rifle raised. Let them go. The Zephyrians turned toward him with what he imagined was amusement. The leader, a massive creature with ceremonial scars covering the visible parts of his exoskeleton, made a sound that might have been laughter. One human soldier thinks he can stop us? The alien's voice was translated by Marcus's implant, but the contempt came through clearly. You should have stayed hidden, little mammal. Now you will watch as we complete our harvest. I said let them go. Marcus's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. Those women aren't cargo. They're sentient beings. Sentient? The Zephyrian leader gestured toward the silent group. Look at them, human. They do not speak, do not resist, do not even blink unless commanded. They are perfect slaves. Their troublesome consciousness, suppressed by our neural dampeners. They will serve the Empire until their bodies fail, and they will never again think a single independent thought. Marcus felt sick. The neural dampeners weren't just controlling the women. They were erasing everything that made them who they were. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, he noticed something the Zephyrians had missed. One of the women, the smallest of the group, was looking directly at him. Her eyes weren't blank, like the others. There was still awareness there. Still a spark of consciousness fighting against the device's suppression. She was resisting somehow, maintaining just enough of herself to observe what was happening. Their eyes met for just a moment. And Marcus saw something there that made his heart race. It wasn't fear or resignation. It was hope. This woman, this alien being he had never met and whose name he didn't even know, was counting on him to do something. The Zephyrian scanner beeped, indicating it had found him. All three soldiers turned their weapons toward Marcus, their plasma rifles charging with an ominous whine. Surrender now, human, and we will make your death quick, the leader said. Continue to resist, and we will ensure you suffer greatly before the end. Marcus looked once more at the woman who was still fighting the neural dampener. He thought about Lieutenant Hayes and Private Rodriguez, lying dead in the forward compartments. He thought about all the civilians who were counting on someone, anyone, to stand between them and the darkness. I've got a better idea, Marcus said, and smiled grimly. Why don't you try to take these women over my dead body? The lead Zephyrian's mandibles clicked in what Marcus assumed was anticipation. That can be arranged. Human. But first, you will watch as we demonstrate what happens to those who defy the Empire. The alien raised one clawed hand toward the woman who had been looking at Marcus. A new device emerged from his armor. Some kind of neural disruptor that pulsed with malevolent energy. Marcus realized with horror that they were going to destroy what remained of her consciousness, turning her into the same empty shell as the others. No, Marcus shouted, raising his rifle. But as his finger tightened on the trigger, the ship's artificial gravity failed completely. Emergency systems shut down one by one, and the transport began its final descent toward the planet below. In the sudden weightlessness and darkness, chaos erupted in the cargo hold. Marcus used the confusion to his advantage, firing his remaining ammunition at the Zephyrian's position, while pushing himself toward the group of alien women. In the zero gravity, his wounded arm didn't matter as much, and his military training and boarding actions gave him a crucial advantage over the aliens who were more accustomed to fighting in standard gravity. The cargo hold filled with the flash and thunder of plasma fire as the Zephyrians tried to track him in the darkness. Marcus managed to eliminate one more of the boarders before his rifle finally ran dry. But the other two were still very much alive and very angry. As the ship continued its death spiral toward the planet's surface, Marcus found himself floating next to the group of alien women. The neural dampeners were flickering in the electrical chaos, and for just a moment, he saw awareness return to all of their eyes. The woman who had been watching him reached out and grasped his hand. Her skin was warm and surprisingly soft. And when she touched him, Marcus felt something impossible. A voice in his mind, speaking words he somehow understood despite never having heard her language. "Thank you for trying to save us," the voice whispered in his thoughts. "Even if we die here, someone cared enough to fight for us. That means everything." Then the neural dampeners stabilized, and the light in her eyes flickered and went out. But Marcus had felt something else in that brief mental contact. A strength and determination that matched his own. These women weren't helpless victims. Given the chance, they would fight back with everything they had. The ship struck the planet's surface with tremendous force, throwing everyone against the bulkheads as metal screamed and twisted around them. Emergency foam deployed automatically, cushioning the impact somewhat, but Marcus still felt his ribs crack as he slammed into a cargo container. When the chaos finally stopped, Marcus found himself in near-total darkness. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically, casting weird shadows throughout the twisted wreckage of the cargo hold. He could hear the Zephyrians moving around, their armor systems providing them with superior night vision and life support. But he could also hear something else. The faint sound of the neural dampeners shorting out one by one in the electrical chaos caused by the crash. The alien women were waking up, their consciousness returning after what might have been years of enforced silence. And as Marcus lay there in the darkness, bleeding and exhausted but still alive, he realized that the real fight was just beginning. The crash had leveled the playing field, and now it would be a battle not just for survival, but for the freedom of 7 beings who had been denied their own voices for far too long. In the distance, he could hear the Zephyrians calling to each other in their harsh language, trying to regroup and assess their situation. But closer, much closer, Marcus heard something that made him smile despite the pain. One of the alien women was humming softly to herself, the first sound any of them had made since he had first seen them. It was a beautiful, haunting melody that seemed to carry all the pain and hope of her people in its gentle notes. The battle for their freedom was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Marcus felt like they might actually have a chance. Marcus lay still in the wreckage, listening to the Zephyrians search through the crashed cargo hold. His ribs screamed with every breath, and he could taste blood in his mouth, but he forced himself to remain silent. The alien women had stopped humming, but he could sense them nearby in the darkness, finally free from the neural dampeners that had held them captive. The planet's surface was hostile. Marcus could feel the temperature dropping rapidly through the hull breaches, and the thin atmosphere made every breath a struggle. They were on some kind of mining world, judging by the rocky terrain visible through the tears in the ship's hull. Red sand swirled outside in the alien wind, and 2 small suns hung low on the horizon, casting everything in an orange twilight. "Search every section," the Zephyrian leader's voice cut through the darkness. "The merchandise must be recovered intact. The Empire has paid too much for these telepaths to lose them now." Telepaths. That explained the neural dampeners, and why these women were so valuable to the Zephyrians. Marcus had heard rumors about races with psychic abilities, but he had never encountered them before. If these women could communicate mentally, that would make them incredibly valuable slaves, and incredibly dangerous if they were ever allowed to organize resistance. A soft touch on his shoulder made Marcus tense, but he recognized the warmth of the alien woman's skin. Somehow, she had moved silently through the wreckage to reach him. In the darkness, he could barely make out her pale features, but her large eyes seemed to glow with their own inner light. When she touched him, her voice filled his mind again, clearer this time without the interference of the neural dampener. "My name is Lyra. We must move soon. The Zephyrians have called for reinforcements." Marcus blinked in surprise, not just at the mental communication, but at the fact that she had somehow learned his language well enough to speak it in his thoughts. "How do you know?" "We learn quickly when we must." Lyra's mental voice carried a hint of what might have been amusement. "Your thoughts are loud and kind. We have not experienced kindness in many seasons." Marcus carefully shifted position, biting back a groan as his ribs protested. "How many of you are there? Are the others okay?" "7 total." We are the last of the Alethean sisterhood. The Zephyrians destroyed our world 6 orbital cycles ago, but they kept us alive because of our abilities. The sadness in her mental voice was profound. My sisters are weak from the neural suppression, but they will recover. We must find shelter before the night hunters emerge. Night hunters? This world is not as empty as it appears. The mining operations were abandoned for good reason. Before Marcus could ask what she meant, a new sound echoed through the cargo hold. A long, mournful howl that seemed to come from somewhere deep underground. It was answered by another howl from a different direction, then another. Whatever lived on this planet, they were waking up as darkness fell. The Zephyrians had heard it too. Their search became more urgent, and Marcus could hear them arguing in their harsh language about whether to continue looking for the women or retreat to their ship. They fear the hunters too, Lyra observed, but not as much as they fear returning to their commanders empty-handed. We must go now. While they are distracted, Marcus tested his weight on his legs, relieved to find that while his ribs were definitely cracked, he could still move. Can you contact your sisters without the dampeners detecting it? The dampeners are damaged. We can speak freely now, but quietly. The Zephyrians have equipment that can detect strong psychic emanations. Moving as silently as possible, Marcus followed Lyra through the twisted wreckage of the cargo hold. The other alien women, her sisters, she had called them, were gathering near a hull breach that led outside. In the faint starlight, Marcus could see them more clearly. They were all variations of Lyra's appearance. Tall, graceful beings, with pale blue skin and enormous dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of wisdom and sorrow. Their movements were fluid and coordinated in a way that suggested constant mental communication. Despite their ordeal, they moved with dignity and purpose that reminded Marcus of classical dancers. The oldest of the group, a woman whose silver hair marked her as an elder, approached Marcus. When she touched his arm, her mental voice was stronger than Lyra's, carrying an authority that spoke of leadership. I am Sarah, elder of the Alethean Circle. We owe you a debt that cannot be repaid, human warrior. You stood against the darkness when no others would. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. I couldn't just stand by and watch. Anyone would have done the same. The looks exchanged between the alien women suggested they disagreed with that assessment. But before anyone could respond, the Zephyrians' searchlights began sweeping toward their position. Outside. Now, Syrah commanded, and the group moved, with practiced efficiency through the hull breach. The planet's surface was even more hostile than Marcus had feared. The thin atmosphere burned his lungs, and the cold cut through his combat fatigues, like knives. The red sand whipped around them in the constant wind, reducing visibility to just a few meters. But the Alethean women seemed unaffected by the harsh conditions, their alien physiology apparently better adapted to environmental extremes. There, Lyra pointed toward a rocky outcropping about 100 meters from the crash site. We can shelter in those caves until dawn. After, Lyra pointed toward a rocky outcropping. They had made it perhaps halfway when the first night hunter emerged from the sand. It was like nothing Marcus had ever seen. A creature the size of a large dog, but built like a cross between a spider and a scorpion. Its carapace was the same red color as the sand, making it nearly invisible until it moved. Multiple eyes tracked their movement as it rose from its hiding place, and Marcus could see rows of razor-sharp teeth in its gaping maw. Don't run. Sarah's mental voice was urgent. Movement triggers their hunting instinct. Stay absolutely still. The creature advanced slowly, its multiple legs making no sound in the sand. It was close enough for Marcus to smell its alien musk when 2 more emerged from different directions. They were being surrounded. Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, but Lyra's touch stopped him. Weapons will only attract more of them. Trust us. The Alethean women formed a circle, their hands linking together. Marcus felt a strange sensation in the air. Like the moment before a thunderstorm, And suddenly, the lead hunter stopped advancing. Its multiple eyes blinked in confusion, and it began backing away. Telepathic confusion, Lyra explained. We made it forget we were here. But the effect won't last long. They moved quickly toward the rocky outcropping, but behind them, the crash site was suddenly illuminated by Zephyrian searchlights. The aliens had either finished their search or decided the risk wasn't worth it. Because their ship's engines were powering up. They're leaving? Marcus asked, as they reached the shelter of the caves. For now, Sierra replied grimly. But they will return with better equipment and more soldiers. We have perhaps one planetary rotation before the hunt begins again. The caves were deeper than they appeared from outside, carved by some ancient geological process into a network of tunnels and chambers. The Alethian women led the way through the darkness. Their eyes adapted for low-light conditions. Marcus had to feel his way along the rocky walls. Grateful for their guidance, they finally stopped in a chamber deep enough to safely allow a small light. Marcus activated an emergency glow stick from his combat kit. And in its pale green radiance, he got his first good look at the women he had tried to save. They were even more beautiful than he had realized. But it was a beauty marked by suffering. All of them bore the pale scars of neural dampener implants, and their too thin frames spoke of inadequate nutrition during their captivity. Yet there was a strength in their bearing that hadn't been broken by their ordeal. You're wondering why the Zephyrians wanted us specifically, Lyra said, settling down beside him on the rocky floor. It wasn't just our telepathy. We Alethians can link our minds together, sharing thoughts and memories across vast distances. To the Empire, we would have been the perfect communication network for their slave worlds. And now you're free, Marcus said. Are we? The youngest of the group, barely more than a girl, spoke for the first time. Her mental voice trembled with uncertainty. Our world is gone. Our people are dead. We have nowhere to go. No way to rebuild what was lost. Marcus looked around at the 7 women, seeing the despair that they had been hiding beneath their dignity. They had been freed from the neural dampeners. But they were still prisoners, trapped on a hostile world with nowhere to run. That's not true, he said finally. You have each other. And you have me. I'm not going to abandon you now. You don't understand, Sierra said sadly. Even if we escape this world, where would we go? The Zephyrian Empire spans half the galaxy. They have marked us as valuable property, and they will never stop hunting us. Then we make sure they can't find you, Marcus replied with more confidence than he felt. There are places in human space where you could disappear. Start over, frontier worlds, where no one asks too many questions about where you came from. The women exchanged glances, their mental communication creating a complex web of thoughts and emotions that Marcus could only sense at the edges of his consciousness. You would do this for us? Lyra asked. Help us reach human territory? You barely know us. Marcus thought about his answer carefully. The truth was, he did barely know them, but in the brief time since the neural dampeners had failed, he had seen enough to know that these were good people who had suffered far more than anyone deserved. And there was something else. Something harder to define. Where I come from, we have a saying, he said finally. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. I've seen what the Zephyrians did to you. What they were planning to do. I can't just walk away from that, even if it costs you your life? Sarah asked. Marcus smiled grimly. Lady, I'm a human soldier stranded on a hostile planet with 7 escaped alien slaves and a Zephyrian fleet, probably already on the way. My life expectancy isn't great regardless of what I choose to do. Might as well go out doing something worthwhile. The silence that followed his words was filled with the subtle interplay of alien thoughts. 7 minds conferring in a language of pure emotion and concept that Marcus could never fully understand. Finally, Lyra spoke for all of them. We accept your help, Marcus Chen. And we offer ours in return. Our combined telepathic abilities are considerable, even weakened as we are. If we work together, we might have a chance of escape. What did you have in mind? Sarah moved closer, her ancient eyes gleaming in the glow stick's light. Tell me, human warrior, how much do you know about stealing spacecraft? Outside the caves, the night hunters howled in the darkness. And somewhere overhead, Zephyrian reinforcements were already accelerating toward their position. But for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Marcus felt hope beginning to kindle in his chest. They had a plan. It was probably suicidal, almost certainly impossible, and would require more luck than any reasonable person had a right to expect. In other words, it was exactly the kind of plan that might actually work. The Zephyrian reinforcement ship Void Hunter touched down at dawn, its massive bulk crushing the scattered wreckage of the crashed transport. Marcus watched from the cave entrance as 36 soldiers in powered armor deployed around the landing zone, their weapons gleaming in the pale morning light of the twin suns. They brought a full battalion, Lyra observed, her mental voice tight with worry. And look, neural dampening equipment. If they capture us again, they won't, Marcus said with more conviction than he felt. We stick to the plan. The plan was insane, but it was their only chance. Using their combined, telepathic abilities, the Alethian sisters would create a massive psychic distraction. A false signal that would make the Zephyrians believe their prisoners were hiding in the mining complex on the far side of the valley. While the majority of the search force was drawn away, Marcus and the women would infiltrate the landing zone and attempt to steal the Void Hunter. The biggest problem was that none of them actually knew how to fly a Zephyrian warship. But as Sarah had pointed out during their planning session, desperate times called for desperate measures. The ship's computer systems should be accessible to our telepathic abilities, she had explained. Zephyrian technology often incorporates bio-neural interfaces. We might be able to interface directly with the ship's consciousness. Ships have consciousness? Marcus had asked. All things have consciousness to some degree, Lyra had replied. Some are just harder to hear than others. Now, watching the soldiers spread out across the crash site, Marcus tried to convince himself that their plan wasn't completely suicidal. The Alethians had spent the night recovering their strength, and their psychic abilities were impressive even in their weakened state. During a brief demonstration, they had managed to make him believe he was seeing a waterfall in the middle of the desert. The illusion had been so complete that he could actually feel the spray on his face. Are you ready? Sarah asked, taking her position at the center of the psychic circle. Marcus checked his salvaged equipment one more time. He had managed to retrieve a plasma pistol and a few supplies from the wreckage, but their real advantage would be surprise and the chaos the sisters could create. Do it, he said. The 7 women joined hands, their eyes closing in concentration. Marcus felt the air around them shimmer with invisible energy, and suddenly, every electromagnetic sensor in the Zephyrian camp began screaming alarms. Through his battlefield awareness training, Marcus could see the soldiers reacting to reports of massive psychic emanations from the mining complex. The trap worked perfectly. Within minutes, most of the search force was loading into armored transports and heading toward the false signal. Only a skeleton crew remained to guard the Void Hunter, exactly as they had hoped. Now, Lyra whispered, and they moved. Getting close to the ship required crossing nearly half a kilometer of open ground, but the Alethians' abilities made them nearly invisible. They created a psychic blind spot around their group, convincing any observers that they were looking at empty desert. Marcus felt like he was walking through a dream as they approached the massive warship. The Void Hunter was a Predator-class destroyer, sleek and deadly with weapon arrays that could level a city. Its hull was black as space, designed to be invisible against the void between stars. Up close, Marcus could see the intricate patterns etched into its armor, Zephyrian war prayers that were supposed to bring victory in battle. 6 guards at the main airlock, Marcus observed. 2 more, patrolling the perimeter. Leave them to us, the youngest sister, Kira, said. Her mental voice had grown stronger during their journey across the desert. We have had much time to think about what we would do to our captors if we ever had the chance. What happened next would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. The Alethian women didn't kill the guards. They did something far more elegant and terrifying. One by one, the Zephyrian soldiers simply forgot what they were doing. They stood at their posts, staring into space with empty expressions, their minds locked in telepathic loops that would keep them docile until the effect wore off hours later. Merciful but effective, Sarah noted as they passed the immobilized guards. We are healers by nature, not warriors. But we have learned much about the mind's defenses during our captivity. The ship's airlock recognized the approach of Zephyrian biosignatures, the guards they had mentally subdued, and opened automatically. Marcus felt a chill as they stepped into the destroyer's corridors, remembering stories of human prisoners who had disappeared into ships like this and never been seen again. The bridge is this way, Lyra said, somehow navigating the alien architecture with confidence. I can feel the ship's neural pathways. It's aware of us. Marcus didn't like the sound of that. Aware how? Zephyrian warships are partially biological, Sarah explained as they moved through corridors lined with what looked like metallic veins. They incorporate neural tissue from conquered species into their control systems. This ship has been fed many different kinds of consciousness over the years. The bridge was a nightmare of organic technology. Control consoles grew from the floor like twisted trees, their surfaces covered with sensor nodes that pulsed with their own light. At the center of it all was the command throne, surrounded by neural interface cables that looked uncomfortably like serpents. I can hear them, Kira whispered, her mental voice filled with horror. The minds they've trapped in this ship, thousands of them, all connected to the ship's systems. They're in so much pain. Marcus felt sick. The Zephyrians hadn't just conquered other species. They had turned their victims into living components of their war machines. Can we free them? He asked. Not without destroying the ship, Sarah replied grimly. But perhaps we can give them peace another way. Sisters, link with me. We're going to try something that has never been attempted. The 7 women joined hands around the command throne, their combined will reaching out to touch the ship's consciousness. Marcus watched in amazement as the organic interfaces began to glow brighter, responding to their telepathic contact. We're in, Lyra said, her voice strained with effort. The ship's mind is vast and wounded, but it recognizes us. It knows we're not Zephyrians. Can you make it fly? Marcus asked urgently. He could hear commotion from other parts of the ship. The remaining crew was starting to realize something was wrong. More than that. Sarah's mental voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. This ship has access to the Imperial Communication Network. We can send a message that will reach every Zephyrian fleet in this sector. Marcus was about to ask what kind of message when the ship's systems came online around them. Engines that could push the destroyer at near light speed began their startup sequence. Weapon systems designed to crack planets began charging. And most importantly, the communication array activated with enough power to broadcast across half the galaxy. What are you doing? Marcus demanded. Giving the Empire something to think about, Sarah replied. Through their link with the ship, she began broadcasting on all Zephyrian military frequencies. The message was simple, but devastating. Using the ship's own authentication codes, Sarah transmitted detailed information about every Zephyrian slave camp, every hidden base, every secret operation that the Void Hunter had been involved with during its years of service. She downloaded the locations of prison worlds, the identities of collaborators, the planned invasion routes for a dozen different star systems. But more than that, she transmitted something the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered before. Hope. To all enslaved peoples, her message rang across the void. Know that resistance is possible. The Alethian Sisterhood has escaped, and we carry with us the memories of every atrocity committed in the name of the Empire. We will not rest until every chain is broken and every voice is free. The reaction was immediate. Zephyrian command frequencies exploded, with panicked communications, as slave worlds across the sector began to stir. The Empire's greatest weapon had always been the belief that resistance was futile, that their victims were alone and helpless. In one broadcast, Sierra had shattered that illusion forever. Impressive, Marcus said as alarms began blaring throughout the ship. But we still need to get out of here before the rest of the Zephyrian force comes back. Already handled, Lyra replied with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as distinctly alien humor. Watch this. Through the ship's sensors, Marcus could see the Zephyrian transports racing back from the mining complex. But as they approached the landing zone, something impossible happened. The Void Hunter began to multiply. Dozens of identical destroyers flickered in and out of existence around the real ship, each one looking completely solid on both visual and sensor scans. The returning Zephyrian forces found themselves facing what appeared to be an entire fleet that had materialized from nowhere. Mass telepathic illusion, Sarah explained. The ship's neural network has amplified our abilities beyond anything we could achieve alone. To their sensors, we appear to be a battle fleet. They won't dare attack. How long can you maintain it? Marcus asked. Long enough, Kira replied, though Marcus could hear the strain in her mental voice. But we need to leave soon. This much psychic energy will attract attention from across the galaxy. The Void Hunter lifted off with a grace that belied its massive size. As they climbed toward orbit, Marcus looked down at the red desert world where this nightmare had begun. Somewhere down there, night hunters were emerging from their burrows to investigate the abandoned Zephyrian equipment. By the time anyone returned to this world, the desert would have reclaimed everything. Where to now? He asked as they broke atmosphere. Home, Sierra replied simply. We're going to find other survivors of the Empire's conquests, other enslaved telepaths who can join their voices to ours. The Zephyrians wanted to use us as a communication network for their slave empire. Instead, we're going to become the nervous system of a rebellion. And the ship? Marcus gestured at the living corridors around them. We've made a bargain with its consciousness, Lyra explained. Freedom for service. All the minds trapped in its neural network want the same thing we do. To see the Empire fall. They're willing to fight alongside us. As they jumped to hyperspace, Marcus felt the ship's strange consciousness brush against his mind. It was alien and damaged. But underneath the pain, he sensed something that made his heart race. Determination. The Void Hunter had been a weapon of oppression for decades, but now it carried something the Zephyrian Empire had never expected: hope. 3 months later, the first Zephyrian slave world rose in rebellion. The planetary governors found themselves facing not just their own oppressed populations, but coordinated resistance from a dozen other worlds simultaneously. The telepathic network that the Empire had tried to create for their own purposes had become their greatest enemy. Marcus stood on the bridge of what they now called liberation, watching as another world declared its independence from the Empire. Around him, the 7 Alethian sisters coordinated with resistance movements across the galaxy, their combined voices carrying messages of freedom to every enslaved planet. Do you ever regret it? Lyra asked him during a quiet moment between operations. You could have stayed on that desert world, waited for rescue. Instead, you chose to fight a war against impossible odds. Marcus looked at her. This alien woman, who had become both friend and comrade in arms. Her pale skin still bore the scars of the neural dampeners, but her eyes blazed with purpose and life. You know what I regret? He said. I regret that it took me so long to understand what you really were. What we are. You're not just telepaths or escaped slaves, Marcus replied. You're the voice of everyone who has ever been silenced by tyrants. Every being who has ever been told that their thoughts don't matter, their dreams don't count, their lives have no value. When I stood up to those Zephyrians in the cargo hold, I wasn't just defending 7 alien women. I was defending the idea that every conscious being has the right to speak their truth. Lyra smiled, the first truly happy expression he had seen from any of the sisters. And that, Marcus Chen, is why the universe needs more humans like you. Outside the viewport, Another star system was breaking free from Zephyrian control. The rebellion was spreading faster than even the sisters had hoped, carried by voices that had been silent for far too long. And at the center of it all, 7 alien women who had found their voices again, and 1 human soldier who had refused to let them be silenced. The Empire would fall eventually. It was inevitable now. But more importantly, in its place would rise something that the galaxy had not seen for centuries. A civilization built not on conquest and control, but on the simple recognition that every being with a voice deserved to be heard. Marcus Chen had started this journey thinking he was just trying to save 7 prisoners. Instead, he had helped ignite a revolution that would reshape the galaxy, and it had all begun with a single human soldier who refused to stand by and do nothing when others needed him most.